About 3 weeks before the release of I Wanna Hold Your Hand, another Orange A label, the Beatles appeared at the Royal Command performance. It was then the biggest variety show of the year and starred popular singers, comedians, dancers, novelty acts, and stars of the stage and screen, all for the amusement of the Queen or one of her royal family, and broadcast to her subjects at home with some pomp on Associated Television. The TV Times went so far as to print a double-page insert, mocked up to look like a formal program with a serrated edge printed in a typeface chosen to resemble handwritten calligraphy. Everything about it was designed to make the viewer at home feel as if they were sharing the evening at the theatre with the Queen Mother and her rather racy daughter, Princess Margaret. On this occasion, the show featured Max Bygraves, the slapstick comedian Charlie Drake, the South American folk group Los Paraguayas, the North American singer Buddy Greco, and the young English singing star Susan Morn, who had just enjoyed a hit with Bobby's Girl. Nadia Narina led the corps of dancers from the Royal Ballet in an excerpt from Sleeping Beauty, and there were to be sketches from the comedy show Steptoe and Son, though sadly not at the same time. Michael Flanders and Donald Swan, who resembled an admiral and a vicar respectively, would be expected to sing their collegiate favourites, the Hippopotamus Song and the Gnu Song, while the cast of the musicals Half a Sixpence and Pickwick were led in excerpts from the hit West End shows starring Tommy Steele and Harry Seacombe. There was usually a special cameo by a big Hollywood star who might just walk on, wave and take the ovation, but this year it was to be a musical performance by Marlene Dietrich, accompanied by her musical director, Burt Bacharach. Somewhere in the middle of the order came the Joe Loss Orchestra, featuring vocalists Rose Brennan, Larry Gretton, and Ross MacManus. Needless to say, the idea that my dad would be sharing the bill with the Beatles was a lot more exciting than the fact that he was to perform for royalty. That show is now mostly remembered because John Lennon introduced Twist and Shout by saying, "For our last number, I'd like to ask your help. Would the people in the cheaper seats clap your hands? And the rest of you, if you'll just rattle your jewellery." It was this quip that grabbed all the headlines the next day. There was no mention that my dad had sung If I Had a Hammer for the Queen Mother, who was very fond of work songs, never having had a job of her own. My memory is that my mother and I watched the show as it happened, but the history books tell me that it had been recorded for later broadcast. Either way, this was long before home video recorders, and such shows were never re-aired, so it might as well have been live, for if you looked away, you missed it. I had to memorize every second of my dad's performance as it happened. In early 1964, the Joe Loss Orchestra starred in a short cinema release called The Mood Men, in which my dad reprised the number that he had sung by Royal Command. My mother and I went to see it as a second feature at the local Odeon. The television appearance had been broadcast in 405 lines of fuzzy black and white, but this was in vivid Technicolor. Unlike the Royal Command performance, it was lip-synced, but what it lacked in musical veracity, it more than compensated for with energy and surrealism. The number opens with a tight shot of hands playing a pair of conga drums and pulls back to reveal a man I recognized to be baritone saxophonist Bill Brown, who I had not previously associated with the playing of Latin percussion. Ross's feature was to reprise If I Had a Hammer, arranged after the Trini Lopez version, featuring only rhythm section and massed percussion. The filmmakers had to do something with the rest of the band, so the members were arranged around the set, playing various bongos, maracas, guiros, and shakers rather than their usual trumpets, trombones, and saxophones. 3 hapless souls revolved on a small circular yellow podium for the duration of the entire number, although the camera failed to register what must have been the eventual green of their complexion. My dad was dressed in the same off-white suit that he'd worn at the Prince of Wales Theatre, and under which he'd been obliged to wear long underwear after the television director claimed that his flesh could be detected through the thin material once my dad stepped under the television lights, which would be bound to scandalize the royal party. In the movie, he lip-syncs the hell out of the number, miming the hammer of justice for all he is worth, while the drummer Kenny Hollock beats time on a gold-sparkled drum kit. The close-ups that come on the repeated line, "It's a song about love between my brothers and my sisters," are eerie to behold for the similarity of our facial expressions at about this age, and especially when singing particular words. Where my dad holds the advantage over me is in his dance moves. Those are steps that I am yet to master. It is a terrific curio of a lost time and a way for me to recapture the thrill of that night in November '63. The morning after the Royal Show, there was all the excitement of hearing about the backstage scene. Over breakfast, I tried to play it cool. "Did you meet Steptoe and Son?" I asked casually. After all, Joe Loss had a novelty number named after the comedy Rag and Bone Men. "And Dickie Valentine?" Eventually, I couldn't pretend that I really cared whether he stood next to Charlie Drake in the presentation line or had shaken hands with the Queen Mum. I blurted out, "Did you actually meet the Beatles?" It had obviously been a long night or an early morning, as my dad wasn't that talkative. He mumbled something about them being very nice lads. Then he reached into his jacket, slung over the back of his chair, and pulled out a sheet of thin airmail paper and handed it to me. I unfolded it, and there were the signatures of all 4 of the Beatles on one page. I'd seen reproductions of their signatures in enough magazines and fan club literature to know that these appeared to be the real thing. The ink seemed barely dry. What I did next will bring tears to the eyes of those who make a fetish of such objects. But I had only a small autograph book, and the paper was too large to be mounted in it. I carefully, if not so carefully, cut around each of the signatures, lopping off the E of "the" in "The Beatles," yielding 4 irregular scraps of paper that I pasted onto its own page in the album. You might say it was me who broke up the Beatles, and it only took a pair of scissors.